Hi, and welcome to another exciting and informative episode of the Harvest Podcast with me, Carmel Fisher. On today's episode, I'm excited to dive into the ESG landscape. With me, I have Lee Stewart, who is a seasoned sustainability professional and the author of How to Build Sustainability into Your Business Strategy. Exciting times, Lee. Welcome to the show.
Right, thanks, Carmel. It's good to be here.
Wonderful. You coming to us all the way from Australia, New Zealand. Which one is it?
I'm in Sydney this morning. Yes, it's a lovely morning. It's spring, getting more sunshine hours, and we're starting to go to the beach. So it's a good time of year to be in Sydney. Yep.
Wonderful to have you on the show, Lee. With over 20 years of corporate sustainability experience, Lee, you've worked across Australia, the UK, Japan, New Zealand, spanning a multitude of spaces, multitude of types of work, from consulting and startups, etc. Tell us more about your background and what motivated you to get into the ESG space.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, as you said, it's been a while. It's been a couple of decades working in this area, from startups to large multinationals and consulting. I suppose what drove me to work into this, I was working in finance, financial data, technology, and having worked in there and looking around, and the privilege of growing up in New Zealand, seeing pristine environment, landscapes, and the love of the outdoors. I just thought, well, how can I craft my career to do good, but also to make money? Obviously, I want to survive and want to travel and do all these great things. So how can I engineer this sort of career so I could work in large corporates? I really enjoy the language of business and working in companies, but how can I help the companies be better, become a force for good, become purpose driven in my career, not just chasing money? And so, yeah, it sort of crafted out with startups. So I managed to learn a lot by going to conferences and other people setting up a startup around education, around sustainability. That helped me get the great grounding, because I spoke to so many experts in the field, and we're talking 20 plus years ago. There weren't many around. And it's really good now. Those become my good friends. I still contact with them today. So that helped me get my first role in a large corporate Fujitsu. And then from there, my career just kind of took off for a number of reasons, but became head of sustainability, opened up to multinationals, and got exposed to so much amazing things. And that's really one good thing about sustainability. When in a role, you can pick up the phone from everyone, from the CEO to the board member to the head of sales to the factory floor. You have spanned so much across the whole business. It's really exciting. You get to learn so much. So I've been very fortunate in that respect.
Great. So just
Yeah.
before we move on to the rest of the questions, I'm just going to say that there was something that I did hear in your accent, New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah.
So born and
Yeah.
raised New Zealand and now in Australia. It's incredible. They're very similar sounding, but okay, moving on. You were
Yeah.
trained by Al Gore himself. Tell us more about that experience and maybe three things that you really have taken home from
Yeah.
that experience.
Yeah, and I was very fortunate to be selected. And after the inconvenient truth of Al Gore, which was kind of a real watershed moment for sustainability, he set up the grassroots foundation called the Climate Reality Project. And you submit your CV, you get selected. And I was fortunate enough in 2010 to be selected to be trained with 300 people around the Pacific region in Indonesia, Jakarta, for 4 days. And what an amazing experience. It was the key three takeaways I got was probably meeting three key people. One was an amazing scientist who has worked in the Arctic regions, climate scientist. Had a long conversation with him. It was amazing how he spent his 2+ decades working in climate science, and the main advisor to Al Gore. Another one was a lovely Fijian rugby player. You'd be familiar with it, sort of the type, very stocky, very blokey guy, but how he talked about what's happening to his islands around Fiji, and the sea level rise and loss of fresh water and so forth, and the emotional story he could take. So the connection that I have with the Pacific really started then, thinking about, wow, these are people in our backyard here in the Pacific who are struggling with climate change right now. And the third thing was the opportunity to meet someone like Al Gore himself, who is by far the best public speaker I've seen live. And it just the emotion and the connection that he can make with a massive room, 300 people, but it felt like he was talking to me the whole day. And the tools that he implored upon us, to how to train and deliver these climate reality presentations, which I've done over 150 of in the last decade. it
Right.
gave me a next level of confidence and conversations I could have with businesses as well. So such a fortunate thing. And it was one of those pivotal moments of my career, which sort of helped me get to where I am today. So I'm so fortunate of that. And I now mentor others. So I've mentored a lot of groups on that, still active in that area, trying to help get the message across the business side of things as well. So yeah.
That note, it sounds like you've gotten to the place where you have discovered your true purpose. You mentioned that many professionals go through their careers without ever discovering that true purpose. Since you're mentoring training, what advice do you give someone who's struggling to find that purpose in their work, in their life's mission? What advice do
Yeah.
you offer?
Yeah, it's really tough, and I deal with a lot of these people as they're sort of coming to the ends of careers, or even at the start. It's more to look like what are you passionate about, and when I mean that, it's what will you read about on the weekends and stuff, not work related. That is
Right.
part of your purpose. So from there, you can craft what you want to do, and every job, every role has a sustainability angle to it. You just need to find it. So if you're an HR professional, you can look at people, social skills is generally attached to that. If you're sort of more a operational engineering, energy is a big thing. Waste, other areas, there's a lot of opportunities there. It's quite broad, the topic of sustainability. So what I'd implore you, if you're searching for purpose, look at what you are passionate about, what might upset you the most about the world, where it's going, and maybe have a look at where you can apply your skills and knowledge. And there's a lot of information out there. There's even a lot of free courses you can do. There's a lot of reading and books and so forth you can do. So look at one area and see how well I can learn about it and whether I could help my own business or my sphere of influence, whether I'm involved in a sporting club, church groups, or whatever. What can I do to help and be a positive impact on the community? So there's a lot to do there, and there's plenty of opportunity.
100%. Obviously, I understand part of training, mentoring, helping people find their purpose in the sustainability field. Was that a reason for writing the book? If so, confirm that, but also tell us what other reasons drove you to
Yeah,
write your book.
there, yeah, there's multiple reasons, but it was that to help others because but actually it came at a pivotal moment in my career. I was actually burnt out of my last major corporate role, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, I suddenly realized, what am I going to do with my career now? Am I done with sustainability? I was at that point, and there I was, just handing my laptop and pass back to my boss, and just understanding, hell, what went wrong here? Um, and I really put everything into that role for the last 3 years. But I thought there's got to be some good out of this. I had a lot of chats with my family, my friends, and then sort of said, yeah, I have to write this book as part of a cathartic experience of things, about a frustration, about of what I see in the world today, and how a lot of the talk around sustainability has been kind of hijacked by multiple frameworks, and it's confusing for business leaders. So I really wanted to write it away to strip away all that jargon, all that sort of outline crap that I see. So as a business executive or a leader, you can actually do some good. You can spend a few hours reading my book, make some changes, and actually do good within a week. You don't have to wait for the perfect framework or to go do this all as analysis. There's stuff you can do right away. And so that's the reason a driver, I see a lot of confusion, a lot of people sitting on the fence, not knowing what to do, quite rightly so, because they hear so many different things. This book was designed to be read in the weekend. You can ask questions to your business on a Monday and hopefully make some change on a Friday. So it's about impact. It's it was born out of the frustration of where I see
Right.
the profession going, and I've been part of that problem, quite honestly, but also the desire to help others. And it was ideally written for myself 20 years ago. If I had this 20 years ago, I'd be much different and learn from my mistakes. There are many in here, but hopefully this can smooth out the pathway for you a bit as well.
Excellent. And so you make it sound like it's a short read. It's got actionable
Yep.
insights that you can use the minute you've
Yep.
done learning or
Yep.
reading about it in your book. Is
Yep.
there any Are there any obstacles based on regulation or wider policies that may impede that progress? Perhaps where you're living
Yeah.
in
Yep.
Australia, but for the world, United States anyway. Most of our
Yep.
our listeners are US based. But
Yep.
what obstacles are are confronting them? And have you mentioned and addressed that in the book?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of legislation coming through, mandatory climate reporting, task force for climate change financial disclosures are coming through. It's led by the finance industry. These could be impediments, but I'm seeing them as opportunities. The way they could be impediments is people get focused on the actual reporting and don't get focused on the doing. So you'd be working, large companies of sustainability teams are turned into reporting teams, not doing teams. So they're going to be found out after 2 or 3 years of just reporting the same thing. They haven't actually achieved any of the goals and targets, so forth they need to do. So that's one trap that I see a lot of corporations falling into. Where I see it as a positive, because the board needs to sign off on this, a lot of board members are learning
Yep.
climate change 101 for the first time, sustainability, trying to get their head around it, which is really, really hard. I've had some of these really awkward conversations in the boardroom, but if it's not awkward, then you don't think you're getting anywhere. So it's uncomfortable, but you're learning as you go on this. But I really see it as an opportunity. The legislation is an opportunity to look into your business, understand what your threats, opportunities are, but also what I implore in the book is sustainability is not a costly exercise. It is a business opportunity and it can be profitable when done correctly. It can open up new markets, resonate well with customers, help attract and retain new talent. I've seen it open up new products. There's a whole lot of other benefits that go around from getting sustainability right. So it's not a cost risk mitigation exercise. I see it as a business opportunity.
Wonderful. And they can find more of those insightful nuggets in the
Yeah.
book
Yep.
called How to Build Sustainability into Your Business Strategy. Now, I'm familiar or I have heard words like scope one, scope two,
Yeah.
scope three, emissions.
Yeah.
You know, for a startup or mid-market company, speak to us about how they can today start making a difference in those levels and explain to us
Yeah.
firstly what are those levels, what do they
Yeah.
mean, and why should we care about them, and how easy is it for a company who's established a way of working, established a supply chain, how easy is
Yeah.
it to go back and rehash all those things and try to fix them post the build.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot in that question. But when we look at, let's just explain sort of a climate change carbon accounting 101 is really simple. We'll try to simplify it. It's in the book, but scope one is it's stuff you burn, really. It's the fuel in your car, any gas, coal you use in operations. There's some other little things like some of the refrigerant gases in your air conditioning are all scope one. Um, Relatively simple if you've got a good handle on, fuel bills and other things like that. Scope two is the electricity you use from the grid. And for here in Australia, some of it's coal, some of it's renewable. So there's a sort of each kilowatt of energy you use, there's what's known as an emission factor of how many kilograms of CO2 are there. So if you've got a good handle on the energy bills, you should be able to measure that quite well. So scope one and two are relatively easier processes. There's a lot of tools out there. Scope three is the Pandora's box. It's looking at there's 15 different categories. It's looking at upstream, downstream, your investments, say your products you use, the products you sell. It's outside of your control. So and that's where that leads into that other question. You look at supply chain. So working with some companies, I've got supply chains of 300 factories all around the world. They're asking now a detailed survey question. It's a multi-year program to understand their scope three and set targets around that. And some will need help. Some are already there. So it's a really um, big issue around scope three, and there's a lot of work going on there, tools, software development, AI is helping and all those sort of things. But if to your question, if you're a small or medium enterprise, probably want to explore why would you care about this? It probably leads to the earlier question I had around legislation, where if you supply a large company, they're most likely be impacted by legislation which mandates them to ask about their supply chain emissions. So you will probably get a question sooner or later about what are the emissions in your supply chain and products you supply us? When have you set a climate target that's in line with science? Because they're probably trying to set one, and that involves their supply chain setting one as well. So you see how the flow-on effects happen right down, and those sort of in the mid-tier market that might not have a sustainability team might be sort of caught off guard a little bit. So what you can do now is start getting a good grasp on your scope 1 and 2 emissions. Finance should be able to help you, procurement. There's some great tools out there. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol offers free courses online. Maybe have someone in the organization start become that sort of carbon champion and learn about that, and then start doing your own footprint. There's a lot of work you can do before you go out there and hire a consultant firm and stuff like that as well. So, and that's also in the book, a chapter about what you can do first before you go externally to save you a lot of money to do that. So you can do some of the framework and stuff yourself, and then hire expertise for exactly when you need it for like specific things around scope 3, which they should help you with. But so there's a lot of tools and tips in there that I've used in consulting that can save you a lot.
Awesome. So what would then be the purpose of a chief sustainability officer? And if not one in person, a virtual chief sustainability officer, which I'm hearing a lot of these days as well.
Yeah, so the role of the chief sustainability officer is actually growing. Before I'd see it, 5, 10 years ago, it was a regulatory role. It's helping people measure emissions, helping meet sort of certain requirements, very environmentally focused if you're especially manufacturing and using that. So making sure you're environmental regulations and stuff. Where I've seen it evolve now is it's becoming more where it's done well is the value add team. So they add value creation. So they look at things like the impact of society you have, communities you operate in. How can you work on programs, not just charity giving? How can you do things like shared value? For instance, you might have a need for a workforce and you might not have enough staff coming in. So how can you work in your local communities to maybe get more people working in IT or something like that, working for schools and programs and things like that? So it's looking beyond the company. A chief sustainability officer now would be regularly in front of your board and executive teams, making sure that the strategy is happening. You've set some targets or setting targets and how you're going towards those targets. And ideally, those targets will span across what's known as the material aspects of your business. So that could be something like climate change, waste, diversity, internal staff, and external around the community. So you really, across the whole business as a chief sustainability officer, you've got your fingers in a lot of pies. You're hopefully directing traffic, not doing things. You've set up different teams like HR, finance, sales, marketing to be responsible for parts of the elements of your sustainability strategy, and you're coordinating that. Where I see the virtual or sort of what known as a fractional chief sustainability officer is coming to play is mainly in that sort of mid to large tier market where they might be unsure of how do they start, or they might not be able to invest in a full-time chief sustainability officer. And those skills aren't really available. There's not much talent out there with the expertise. So this is what I do. I now work, I'm sort of a virtual chief sustainability officer for 3 companies at the moment where I've helped set up the strategy. Following the methodology in the book, we've helped set targets. I've worked with boards and executives to educate them to understand, and I've done a market scan on competitors, regulation, help them with some key hurdles around regulations. And for 2 of my 3 clients, very happy to say I've helped them hire and now coaching and mentoring their first sustainability officer, and then helping them with the board engagement, and then they're bouncing ideas off me as they go through. So they're coming in already to an established strategy, an engaged board and executive. So hopefully they can hit the ground running and run the program that's already designed and so forth. So that's one way you can get over that hurdle without investing in a big team and so forth, is look for that fractional or virtual chief sustainability officer.
Wonderful. I imagine that there's some challenges. That is why we need a chief sustainability officer. This is why we need a strategy, because we've got to have a plan to, navigate our way through a more recent way of doing business, right? It hasn't been this way. It's a very necessary way of doing business, and everyone's trying to, catch up, if not build things as they speak. And with AI, of course, this is a lot easier. But talk to us about the biggest challenges you've encountered across businesses that you think your book and your mentoring speaks to.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenges I've found is companies and executives, and they know they need to do something, but they're so not sure. They've heard all the stories about a company set a target, didn't achieve it, and all the sort of greenwashing and so forth that leads to maybe green hushing. They don't want to talk about stuff. They're too afraid to commit. What I find is there's two key things. When you're 100% sure, you're almost too late. So, and that leads to the next thing where I see with executive boards, you have to be comfortable with ambiguity. This is different to setting a financial target and strategy and trying to hit, revenue targets. This involves a bit longer term planning, sometimes 5, 10, 20 years ahead. And as you move out those timelines, the ambiguity is going to increase, but you've got to be comfortable with that and be adaptive. So, and the final mention I work in my book is you also need a little bit of courage, because when you set the strategy, things generally don't go 100% to plan, but it doesn't mean you throw away all of sustainability, which I've seen in the past. I think, no, we tried it, it didn't work. Throw your hands up and go, well, actually, that part of that strategy didn't work. That's what we need to fix, not the whole thing. So it needs a bit of courage, need to be comfortable with ambiguity, and also, when you really want to dive into it, you want to be 100% sure, you're probably almost too late to the game. So you've got to actually make a start.
So, you were notably also the regional head of sustainability for Japanese-owned company Fujitsu, global IT company, major. And I know that you've developed several sustainability technology solutions, including the multi-award-winning digital owl solution. What was the efficacy of that? Tell us more about it for those who don't, have the details on it, and also what you learned from implementing that at such a large known company.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for the question. Such a fascinating project where, as head of sustainability at Fujitsu, I was very close to the sales team because I wanted to align myself with where the revenue comes in. I was helping the sales teams win business and align the sustainability message with the key clients. And as I was sitting there, I sat next to one of the developers as we're developing new technology, which was called body worn camera for police. New South Wales police would wear cameras so they could, when they're in a bad situation, they can use that. And this was almost a decade ago. So I know that's quite common now with police forces. But as I was listening to the guys saying how they use the early stage of AI technology, facial recognition and stuff, I said, oh, could that technology be used to identify um, plants or animals? I go, yeah, sure, it could be. So at the same time, I was having a conversation with the New South Wales Department of Environment about how saving our species, and it's really sad here in New South Wales and Australia, there are almost 1,000 native species at risk, and they just don't know where they are. And what they do is they would fly helicopters around looking for the scanning areas, which is vastly expensive because, as I learned, every hour of helicopter flight, not just the fuel and emissions, but every hour flying, you need 2 hours of maintenance, hugely expensive. So at the same time, this all sort of came together. At the same time, a week before, I had a breakfast innovation with a commercial drone company called Carbonics. So I sort of brought these things together, these three parties together, us with the technology, a commercial drone, and a need for the New South Wales government and environment. And what I did was I pitched to the business in sort of a Dragon's Den type scenario to get the funding, seed funding, to call what was known as Digital Hour, where we used our AI technology with a commercial drone, and we flew it out in the outback of New South Wales looking for this endangered plant, which they needed to manage and map to make sure they can add extra covenants on that land, extra protection, because that might be developed or certain things. So we spent 2 days in the field flying this commercial drone, which could actually, like a small plane, it could cover so much vast area, as much as a helicopter, if not more. And we mapped the terrain. It's so much quicker now, but we took it back, and some poor grads for 2 weeks had to tag what they thought was it and then drill into the digital stuff, analysis and geotag it. But we found the endangered plant, which was it was a really cool story. And we, won some awards, but it also, not only did it help the Department of Environment, it helps cut down helicopter jet fuel. It's a cost savings exercise, and it's a useful exercise. They use it now for similar technology used to find koalas, rock wallabies as well, with heat signatures and stuff. So it's a real great story of where technology, can help the environment. And it was, yeah, just a fascinating project. One of the key highlights of my career. So thanks for asking that question.
Of course. No, I mean it's wonderful to hear about things stemming from a need, but you also just being so impassioned about, helping things. I just think it's fantastic, and using those key strategies to move the needle in ESG. So thanks for elaborating on that. Tell us about a mandatory climate related financial disclosure. What is that? I know mandatory is obligatory.
Yeah.
We've got to do it. But tell us more. I imagine it's related to, especially to public companies, where they're
Yeah.
becoming more and more, right? They're becoming more. It's more needed for them to disclose these things. But
Yeah.
yeah, you elaborate in your professional opinion and expertise on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I suppose the intent of this was to help investors understand future climate risks of their portfolio. So it stemmed from the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures. Sorry, there's so many acronyms, but TCFD. And what has happened is countries around and jurisdictions around the world are taking that framework and a couple other frameworks, which I won't bore you with the detail, but what that is looking at what is your climate risks today and in the future, and what are also the opportunities. So what is that making look at? So say, for instance, if you're agriculture, water stress might be an issue for you because you might not be able to grow your crops in the future. Certain parts of the country will be better or worse off with a 1.5 to, dare I say, 3 or 4 degree temperature rise. What is going to happen if there's these sort of scenarios? Are there also new opportunities? For instance, could you grow different types of crops, more climate resilient crops? Could you open up new markets and so forth? So this is looking at what is the risk today and in the future against those sort of temperature rises, and then also looking at what is the financial implication of these later on, which does scare a lot of people because if you look at an agriculture sector and science is saying in 20 years, there's going to be no water here. But in 20 years, we still need to grow grain in this crop here. So what does that look like? What are we going to do now? Do we need to start looking at different crops or moving, adaptable land and so forth? So that's it in a real tight nutshell. There's companies are now doing this because of a disclosure in New Zealand, Australia. New Zealand's been doing it for a year. Australia just passed a law a couple months ago. I believe California is looking at something similar. You've got the UK, EU's doing it. Even China's looking at some sort of shape or form. So it's looking at that, but also some of them are adding, like in Australia, New Zealand, you have to do mandatory report on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions as well. So it's growing, and as that grows from the big companies, especially the public companies, that puts pressure, as I mentioned before, down on those suppliers to those companies as well. They'll be asking for their climate risk plans. If you're a critical supplier, you need to understand that. Say, for instance, if you export the port you export out of, what's their climate resilience adaptation
Right.
risk plan? How does that feed into your overall logistics? So you can see how the sort of spider's web grows from just your company across.
Right.
So it's kind of forcing you to look at your whole business ecosystem and see opportunities and risks.
For sure. And would you say these are ways that sustainability and ESG can attract investors, or are there more
Yeah,
ways?
yeah, absolutely. Previous companies I was working for, they're looking to divest parts of their investment. So I was in there saying, well, would you like, if you're selling off that factory or that site, would it make sense if you sold it with a climate resilience adaptation plan and a net zero strategy? So investors are definitely looking at this. If your company doesn't have one, it might not be even picked up as part of an ethical fund they're looking to put together. So there's green bonds and green funds. If you're looking to access capital in the future, I'm talking to some clients now where they've been told by their bank and their financer to get a sustainability strategy because you're now part of our financed emission portfolio and you're in the red box. We need you to have a strategy and a net zero plan so you can stay fundable in the future even. And you can have less basis points on your finance if you have a net zero strategy, sustainability strategy, and targets. So you might miss out on that sort of funding as well. So definitely makes sense to pay attention.
For sure. How how does sustainability affect business right now? And then what future trends are you looking forward to in the industry?
Yeah. So definitely impacting business right now. If you're a large user of energy or large polluter, sometimes you might be other sort of there's carbon taxes or various mechanisms around that, emission trading schemes that are impacting you today. The other one that I've seen a lot, the rise of the conscious consumer, especially if you consumer goods are looking at that. Packaging's a big thing. Plastic waste is coming up because it's very physical and tangible. People see what's happening to our beaches and pristine environmental areas. That's impacting you now. And some of the latest surveys you're seeing is that, uh, consumers want to spend money where companies are trying to do good, and have a good plan in respects. Some surveys done from some of the big four consulting firms say that also 70 to 80% of staff want to work for companies that are purpose driven, not just profit driven. So you're seeing it impact the talent attraction and retention as well. So there's a lot of myriad of layers of impact, and it really does depend on where your business sits and what you do. In terms of the future trends, I'm seeing more legislation, more disclosure, more transparency is required for businesses. Um, Trust is a big issue around that. You're seeing a lot of legislation coming hard down on greenwashing claims, so overstating your environmental claims or social claims around products without any key evidence. So you're going to see a lot more people, if they're making claims, to be substantiated by third-party certifications and things like that. So the trend is definitely moving towards more um, due diligence, more legislation, which needs more skills, and companies need to be a bit more savvy in understanding their impacts and fixing that. Because the way of social media and stuff, disclosure and transparency, it can run away very quickly on you. And
Yeah, 100%. Well, rounding off the interview, what closing remarks do you have for businesses of any kind to bring sustainability into their business strategy? Where can they find you? Just give our listeners something to start with and to think about,
yeah,
in terms of where they're at and where we'd like to see them,
yeah.
not just us, but regulation, etc., and how you can help them get there.
Yeah, I suppose to your listeners, a key question I ask in the book, and just ask this of yourself, if your business did not exist today, would the environment or society be better or worse off? And really have a think about that. Would anyone really miss you if you just were gone? And answering that question, when I've answered it to boards and executives and one-on-one or to large conferences, the answers to that question normally are your opportunity and threat almost at the same time. But have a think about that, and that's where you should be your starting point of where you could really hone in and focus on. The other sort of thing is just understand your impacts. Do a basic carbon baseline, understand that, or or spend time talking to other parts of your business if you're a larger organization. If you're smaller, understand your companies you supply, what are their sustainability targets and goals, and how do you align with that or you don't align? Because in the future, you're going to be asked questions around that, and it pays to be sort of front foot those as well. So hopefully that gives you some sort of tangible things you can work on. How you can find me, my author website is leestewart.com.au. So it's leestewart.com.au. My book, How to Build Sustainability into Business Strategy, is on Amazon. If you go to my website, you can sign up. Actually building out more resources, videos, training, and other free resources you can have to help you build your own sustainability strategy.
Wonderful. Thank you for this informative, helpful conversation. I think ESG is definitely everybody's concern. So, Lee Stewart, fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. You're listening to the Harvest Podcast. I'm Carmel Fisher. You stay tuned. That's it from the Harvest Podcast, available anywhere you find podcasts. Stay tuned for more.